Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Chef IQ. I think one of the most exciting watches of the last year actually came in the form of a relatively speaking unexciting and innovative piece. And that's Vacheron Constantin's Overseas collection, a collection that I have a lot of opinions about, and we'll get into that and the history of it and its inception back in the 1970s and some tricky little histories and facts about it. But, this Overseas collection that just came out in all precious metal, in precious gold, as well as olive dials, was interesting because Vacheron did not in any way reinvent the wheel this past year the way that Patek Philippe sort of did with their Aquanaut and Nautilus denim collection. Vacheron did something that was almost played out in that the color they went with, the tone, was green, a color that at this point in the watch industry is a little bit of old news. So we'll be talking about a lot today. Again, the history of the watch, its significance, importance, its odd evolution in multi-generations, how this watch has changed so much over its lifetime. And furthermore, what happens to a color? What happens to a brand theme after it's, a little bit tired? Is it still worth producing? Is everything just a fad? Is anything everlasting? Interesting stuff. So let's get into it today. I'm wearing a beautiful Rolex Day-Date in a purple dial. This was never manufactured from factory. This dial was born champagne and time and weather have aged it to a beautiful purple. This watch is not for sale in the Theo and Harris shop, but plenty other watches are. So go take a look at our watches and straps, and welcome to my apartment where we're recording today in a pinch. Thank you for your patience. Let's talk about the Overseas. Let's talk about the Overseas, which began not as the Overseas, but rather as the 222 model, a really interesting integrated bracelet sports watch design introduced in 1977. But that watch really began a couple of years before that, began with Gerald Genta in 1972, when Gerald Genta released the Royal Oak with Audemars Piguet. Now, what's interesting is, the Royal Oak was not an immediate hit, not an immediate success. And the Royal Oak was really the first draft in many ways of a movement that would go on to yield Patek Philippe's Nautilus in 1976. And a lot of people believe that this watch, that this 222, was also designed by Genta because it is so logical and true to that design philosophy, right? The juxtaposition of industrial design and elegance. That's the point of these watches, right? The beauty of the Royal Oak is that it's so industrial and still thin and elegant. Same thing with the Patek Philippe Nautilus. If you've held these watches, it's amazing how sleek they are, how comfortable, how sort of delicate, reliable and well built, sure, but delicate, articulating, gently, clearly well made, right? I love the Submariner. I love so many other watches from so many other brands, but there is something uniquely balanced, right? That juxtaposition about those watches. And the brilliant mind behind the Vacheron 222 was not Gerald Genta. It was a fellow named George Heisek, who would go on to create a couple of other watches for Tag Heuer and for Breguet. And I think that really his greatest hit was the 222. I don't think he ever went on to achieve that same height, that same perfection. And it's funny because one, he doesn't get a lot of credit for it because so many people assume that it was by a different designer, a more famous designer. And number two, because it was a reaction, a response, not a copy, not a ripoff, but it was a reaction and response to a design movement that was started by somebody else. Brief little esoteric kind of, historical opinion here. I've said this before on this channel, but I don't think it's ever oversaid. Gerald Genta, the famed Gerald Genta that was behind the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, even he, I don't think, was the founder of this idea of juxtaposing elegance with industrial design. I go back further to the likes of Louis Cartier, particularly with the Santos Dumont. I even go further with the Tank Normal. The Tank Normal is, by definition, juxtaposing industrial design and elegance, right? The Tank Normal, now we look at it as, it's an elegant tank. It's literally designed by an aggressive war machine. I mean, with hard angles, brushed and polished edges. So this idea that Gerald Genta came up with, while of course brilliant and significant, and I'm not taking a thing away from him, he wasn't the first person to, put these two ideas together, try to meet them. Now, he did do it in steel, and he did it in a time that, was tumultuous in the watch industry, right? The quartz crisis we were in the midst of. A lot of these brands didn't know where their next paycheck was coming from or if they'd even be able to survive, right, past the next couple of years. Cash flow's a problem. Everything's a problem. They needed a shock, right? They needed a volt of energy, and Gerald Genta came and delivered it. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Chef IQ, the world's smartest and thinnest wireless meat thermometer. I legitimately love Chef IQ. Here's why. The quality of the product is incredible, yes, but the significance of the problem that it solves is huge. I love to entertain, I love to cook, be it for my little family or be it for a bunch of friends, and I have zero tolerance for basically messing up food. I don't like the anxiety of something maybe being over or undercooked. I want this to be a sure bet. Food costs money, the entertainment matters, the food matters, and Chef IQ is absolutely the most valuable partner in the kitchen, the most valuable sous chef you could possibly have. It has unlimited range of Wi-Fi connectivity that allows you to monitor your food literally from anywhere. And the app features real-time cooking alerts, timers, and a live cooking graph, as well as hundreds of recipes and guided cooking step-by-step videos. And Chef IQ works in a grill, in an air fryer, in a deep fryer, in a smoker, in a stove, in an oven, or even sous vide. There is nothing really that Chef IQ doesn't do. I can't tell you how many fans of the Theo and Harris channel have purchased Chef IQ. Fantastic gift, by the way, because it comes in 1, 2, or 3 probe configuration. Again, I really couldn't recommend Chef IQ more. It is a tool that you will be thankful that you invested in. So head on over to Chef IQ and use the link below. Thank me later. Moving on to the next point, and I know I'm going fast here, but I do have a call in 11 minutes, so I'm really banging this one out. I think it's also interesting that George Hyzek was able to respond to this movement so quickly, right? Within a year of the Nautilus being introduced, right? The Nautilus is essentially what I think really cemented this movement as a movement. The Royal Oak was a watch that was released, sort of unpopular, and in 1972, and then Patek Philippe, through the same designer, kind of made this a movement in 76, right? It was the second effort, now validated by the world's most important watch brand, Patek Philippe. This is validating. This was a very validating release, the Nautilus. The Royal Oak was an experiment, and the Nautilus was validation that the experiment worked. And Hyzek responded in brilliant form that next year, 77, okay, which is coincidentally the year that my Datejust was manufactured, in the year Elvis died, in the year Hotel California was history. Think about it. So if the watch was released in 1977, when did that watch's design begin? There's no real way to know, right? I mean, there's rumor, of course, fine, but when did that begin, right? If George Hyzek was viewing the brilliance of Genta, you have to imagine that it began as soon as he saw the Royal Oak, right? That's right, the stimulus and then the reaction. So maybe it did take from 72 to 74, 5, 6, or 7, right? How long does watch design take? Well, Gerald Genta says that he drafted the Royal Oak very quickly and on a napkin, without much ado at all, right? Sometimes brilliance happens like that, right? I think that there are plenty of songs that are the same way, right? They come to you in the shower, right? It's an amazing thing that I certainly cannot relate to, because when I have to do something good, it takes me a long time. But then, okay, fine, the design happens. Well, how long does manufacture take? How long does it take to perfect that design in its, construction methods? How long does it take to make a perfect bracelet? How long does it take to do all of these things, right? So moving on from the history portion of this, after I think that we've established that this is a brilliant design that lives within that Genta world. It is a grandchild of Genta, but it is brilliant and unique. I don't think it's reductive, or it is in a way, it has derived from Genta, but I wouldn't use the term derivative. I don't think that it's it has a negative connotation, right? I think this is a piece of brilliance. But the 222, unlike the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, had a weird lifespan. While it was released in a full collection to success, the watch went away and was replaced with the Overseas. And then there were 3 generations of Overseas watches over the years with different levels of complication. And Vacheron did not, like Patek Philippe and Audemars Piguet, stake their future or never waver from the brilliance of this design. Vacheron did waver, which is really unique and interesting, and maybe that's part of the reason why Vacheron on a popularity level is, I think, by far, right, the third, like the little brother of the 2 other brands, even though they are, right, they're so old. The 222 was released in 1977 to celebrate their 222nd anniversary. This is the oldest brand of the 3, and yet they do have a little bit of a little brother kind of, I think, reputation, right? And maybe it's because they hedged on the 222. I don't know. But then, on the contrary, the Nautilus and the Royal Oak, right, didn't really blow up in popularity again until the 2000s, 2012, 13, 14, and then, of course, into the COVID years. So, when Audemars Piguet in like 2011, 2012, they couldn't even sell a jumbo Royal Oak. These watches were, readily available. In fact, they almost would beg you to buy one. So much has changed in culture, but this most recent iteration of the 222, rather of the Overseas, I think is really intelligent, really brilliant, so well balanced, and this full collection is really incredible. And it's all, there have been so many different little pieces of culture here. Of course, you have the Corey Richards special edition watch in titanium that with him went to Mount Everest, attempted to summit the mountain unsuccessfully. Weather stuff happened, but still successful in its, in a grander sense. If you zoom out, right, this was a really intelligent collaboration between brand and not cheap influencer, right? Between brand and I think, culturally significant individual that embodies the purpose, the mission of the collection, right? To be an explorer, right? To be someone that pushes the limits of this sports watch, and the fact they made it so custom was so interesting. But that was a really establishing point for that watch, for sure. The only criticism I have, right? Because I really do like this little collection of green pieces here, and I'll answer my original question, in a second about the color green and when does it become passé. But the other question I have here is, and it's the only question, they've got so many great Overseas. I love the Time Only, I love the Chronos, I love them all, right? But the Overseas, currently in its collection, does not respect completely the original thesis of the 222. And now the 222 has since been released in small collection, precious metal. I think it will continue in the future. But it's kind of interesting that the 222 and the Overseas, which is the 222 successor, are now existing or coexisting. It's kind of interesting. But the Overseas is still a child of the 222, and yet that juxtaposition of elegance and sport and utility and industrial design has not been totally respected. Right? They're a little bit thick. They're a little bit bulky in their bracelet. They're not quite as tapered. They're a little bit more modern and sporty. And I do think they have lost a little bit of sight as to what made the collection, the model so brilliant, what made George Heisek so brilliant back in 1977. I still love the watches. I'm sure many of you have them on your wrist. I adore them. But objectively speaking, they do not embody that same idea of proportion and kind of slender industrial design. But there is a watch that Vacheron makes in the Overseas collection that does. And it's the very limited white gold Overseas that I think is essentially a perfect watch. I think that white gold Overseas is just as good, if not better, and I mean Time Only, than anything that Patek Philippe is manufacturing in their Nautilus line and anything Audemars Piguet is manufacturing in their Royal Oak line. Maybe with the exception of a couple, maybe the yellow gold vignette, maybe the blue Tuscan, sure, a couple that I think are on par, fine, maybe even a little bit better. But Vacheron has killed it with that watch, but they haven't maintained those proportions in their regular catalog. It looks the same from a distance, but it's very different upon closer inspection. That is odd to me. That doesn't make any sense, right? Audemars Piguet does a similar thing, of course, with their jumbo versus their other Royal Oak models, but the jumbo is at least, while not gettable, it's at least out there. It's not just legend and lore, which the white gold Overseas ultra thin is. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I love the whole collection. I love the fact that they're sticking with green. And the answer to my question before, green is no longer the color of the moment. There really isn't a big color of the moment right now, but green is at least 2 or 3 years old, right? It's 2 or 3 years old. Every brand has done it. And Vacheron stuck with it. And I think that was interesting, right? Because it did bring up the question like, oh, that's funny. It's no longer fresh and new, so why are we doing it? It's like, oh yeah, because some things are just beautiful and they'll always be beautiful. And if you do the right color green and it's a great watch with a great movement and great proportion, it's not supposed to be out of style 6 months from now, a year from now. That's the point of this industry, really, timelessness, right? Even though you've got these products that by nature not necessary or we don't need them, we want to be able to rely on them for 100 years or 200 years. We want to be able to pass these watches down forever. And in that, that means that nothing they produce should be going out of style anytime soon. They should not just be good because they are in right now. So I don't think this was a big deal. I don't think this was innovative, but I do like what it represented. And it represents a timelessness from Vacheron Constantin that I respect very much. So good for you, Vacheron Constantin. Congratulations on the overseas success. I love to see you being mobile. I want to see more overseas on the wrists of more people because it is an underrated watch and has been for quite some time. And I'm glad it's finally found its way. I've got to go. I have a call. See you guys soon.